Welcome back to another episode of Direct Edition, a podcast about nothing and everything. I'm your host, Dave, and this is the podcast. I think we're like episode 51 overall, but halfway point of season 3. And I have been having a blast these last couple of weeks, just piling on the interviews. The last 2 you heard were Sean Crystal and then Sanford Green. I hope you like both of them. And if you haven't listened to them, please go. Please go. Do it now. Shut this off and then come back to it. Look at those lines on my forehead. Anyway, I think I'm going to do a fun little kind of like string of stories that all relate to one thing. It was kind of inspired by a conversation I had in the car with my buddy Trip, who, if you're familiar with the other channel, he's been a moderator and a friend on West Coast Davengers since pretty much the beginning of the live stuff. Anyway, we went to Emerald City Comic Con this week in Seattle on Thursday, March 6th. And we always have interesting conversations. It's a lot of me talking. He has told me before, he's just like, yeah, I like listening to you talk. You know, like there are some, it's hard. And this is a little side note, but it is hard for somebody like me who talks and is a talker, obviously, to understand the mindset of somebody who enjoys being in a friendship or, you know, being somebody's company that's more of a listener and, you know, has input, and it's usually kind of pick your spots input and not a ton of talking like I do, because I talk a mile a minute. By the way, shout out to Tacoma's own Howdy Bagel, my new Howdy Bagel shirt, a great business. If you are in Tacoma, you must have. And as a New Yorker and a Jew and a bagel fiend, I got to say, you're talking about one of the better bagels I've ever had. Okay, back to the story. So we drove to Seattle and drove back, and at Emerald City Comic Con this weekend, I met Jeff Darrow for the first time. Jeff Darrow is an artist who's been in comics for 25, 35 years, whatever. He also is one of the lead designers on The Matrix, and like the Wachowskis were a big fan of his and literally said, we want you to come help us with this movie. He has worked with Frank Miller on 2 very high profile stories, Hard Boiled and Rusty the Boy Robot and Big Boy. But that's not what the story's about. I met him for the first time, and me and Jeff are friends on Facebook. I've never met him. We've never really spoken. He was good friends with Ed Piskor. He's good friends with Sean Japan Book Hunter, but he knew who I was and greeted me very warmly. And it was just like, it was a beautiful surprise for me to be greeted like that. But me and Trip were talking about it, and I was starting to tell him about something, my like 10, 15 year hobby of collecting autographs, which started, maybe even 20 year hobby, which started when I was real young. And there's so many stories to talk about. Like I started writing a book about it about 10 years ago, but I just kind of filled up like half a notebook and then never wrote again. But those stories, I wanted to write them down. And there's going to probably be a lot of talk about these stories on this podcast as time goes on. But he got me kind of thinking how I've always been fascinated with wanting to meet artists and actors and actresses. Not like, I think when I was younger, it was, you know, to be like, oh, I met this person and I got an autograph. As I kind of kept meeting more musicians and people that worked in movies, I think it really was because I wanted to be able to put myself in a position where I got to ask this person a question, or I got to, you know, say thank you for making this thing. Or I, you know, like in the case of Peter Jackson, I was a fan of his when I first saw Bad Taste in middle school. And, you know, he went on, he did Bad Taste, Meet the Feebles, Dead Alive, Heavenly Creatures, The Frighteners, and then obviously Lord of the Rings. And his career obviously is, you know, a pretty storied and legendary career since then. King Kong, The Hobbit, you know, all that stuff. Because I was such a fan and I was going to film school, you know, it was something like, oh, this person is the reason why George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Peter Jackson's low-budget horror movies are the reasons why I ever wanted to make movies and I ever wanted to be behind a camera. And what's funny is where I've gone with the YouTube channel and just the stuff that I filmed that were like skits and like all that kind of like digging through comic stuff. it's inspired by the fact that I've always wanted to direct in some way or another and create via the camera. And like, the more I talk about it with friends or on the podcast, the more I say these things out loud, the more I realize like how my path kind of always was going to lead me towards being in front or behind a camera or both. I just never had it nurtured in me. I never had anybody encourage me to do these things. Anyway, that's a different story. So yeah, I got to meet Peter Jackson waiting outside the first press junket for the first Lord of the Rings movie. And I had this, I used to go to horror conventions, and I had this 6-foot Italian or French, I still have it, Bad Taste poster. And I was outside in the cold at the Waldorf Astoria, and I showed it to him, and he was like, his mind was blown, and he signed it for me and everything. We just chatted a little bit, and I just got to, thank him for Bad Taste and for inspiring a lot in me. And he, very sweet man. I never really thought about the fact that it was like, cool, getting the autograph's great, taking a photo with the person's great, but getting to actually speak to them is really kind of always sticks with me. I've told the story on the podcast about Johnny Depp and how I asked him if Marilyn Manson was actually originally cast to play Willy Wonka, and he said, yeah, I don't think it was official. But anyway, I told that story on a podcast. And so, yeah, it's just one of those things that, like, I think I was meant to, I had a couple people make me feel bad about being, like an autograph collector, and not people that I was getting autographs from, just people in my life. And then I never really got to like kind of dissect why I always enjoyed meeting these people. But I mean, it's natural. If you're obsessed with movies, you're obsessed with music, or you're obsessed with sports, whatever it is, like, you want to meet the people that are in these roles. I mean, I think that's only natural, right? So if you've listened to this podcast or talked to me or have known me for more than 4.5 seconds, then my favorite band is Pearl Jam, and it always has been. Like Guns N' Roses was first, but I will live and die by Pearl Jam. There's no band I'd rather be listening to or seeing live, or all of it. So I started seeing them at a pretty young age. I got to see them in 1994. It was the week that Kurt took his own life, and it was the last show that Dave Abruzzese played as the drummer in the band. So I was 14 and a half, because it was April of 94. From the first show I saw them, I said to myself, maybe I said to my brother who took me to that show, I want to meet them. I really would love to meet them. They make me so happy. And so, I've seen them a couple more times on each album cycle. I think I've saw them every 2 or 3 years or whatever. And in 2000, they played 3 shows at Jones Beach on Long Island, which I didn't go to them because I had seen them on that tour in North Carolina because my brother lived there. So it was the second show of the tour. So it was like, I didn't have the means to see them a whole bunch of times on one tour. It wasn't until a couple years later that I had money like that. But I had started going into New York City to meet celebrities, go to David Letterman or the Howard Stern show and kind of wait outside the studios and get autographs and take photos. Like, I got to meet Dave Grohl pretty early on doing that. So I was running with a lot of people that did that professionally, that were autograph seekers and stuff. And this is, and one of the things that we talked about, me and Tripp, in this discussion when I told him these stories, it was so different back then because there were no cell phones everywhere. There were no cell phones. I was still, up until like whatever, 2005, maybe, when I got my first Razr phone, we were using, to take photos, instant cameras, because they were always dependable, the Fuji ones. And then I think I got my first digital camera probably around 2003, like a point and shoot, maybe 2004. And so you could be a very famous person on the street, and if there was no paparazzi around, that's it. You were getting noticed, but you weren't getting your photo taken. So he was notorious for coming back late. My friend's like, look, come with me. We'll go to the hotel. Eddie's usually good when he comes back from shows. I was like, okay. It was like 1 a.m, and a black SUV pulls up. Eddie comes out. Never realized he was my height, or a little bit shorter than me. Zips up his jacket, but before he did, I could see he was wearing a Chicago Blackhawks jersey. He just grew up in Chicago, and he was good friends with Chris Chelios, so I'm assuming it was a Chelios jersey. But just asked him, "Hey Eddie, do you mind signing?" And no, there was 3 of us there. You mind taking photos? No, and it was very brief. It was very brief. Like, it was late, so yeah, that's what that was. That was the first time I met him, and I was so nervous. Like, not as nervous as when I met James Hetfield when I was like 16 or 15. I was shaking. So then 2003 rolls around, and they play shows in New York. We go to the shows in New York and on Long Island and Albany, at Madison Square Garden. And I don't think no, you know what? I did meet Eddie again, but I just got an autograph, and it was also very brief. But I stayed, I'd met Mike McCready. I met them all, and like McCready at that time was the one person that I'd actually had like a conversation with, and he was so nice. It was, he's still probably the nicest guy in the band, hands down. I've ran into him at the airport before, and he takes his time talking to people. 2005, I was living with a homie, Scott, and our other 2 roommates, and Pearl Jam had announced a tour, that they were doing a full Canada tour, and they had never done one like this before, because it was, I want to say they started in Quebec and worked their way west through Canada. Big fucking country, But the thing is they were playing some of the major market cities, but they were also playing small cities or places that they hadn't played in a long time. Saskatoon and Winnipeg, and maybe they played Brampton or Barrie, one of those Ontario smaller cities. But anyway, we got tickets to go see them in Montreal, and then it was either the next night or 2 nights later, we got tickets to also see them in Ottawa, Canada, the capital. And so me and Scott planned this trip that we were going to stay in Montreal the whole time, just drive to Ottawa, and then come back to Montreal and spend the rest of the time in Montreal, go see a hockey game, go do other things, various stuff. And we did. It was great. We booked like a 5-day trip, and I was so excited. We flew up to Vermont and drove. We were always good about trying to find the hotel that they were staying at so that we could like go and see if we could meet them coming out or, coming back from the show, kind of like, what we do. And I know it sounds weird because it's a different time now, but when you think about how, if you watch footage of like the Beatles in America or even in anywhere once they got big, there was like hundreds of people at the hotel, screaming girls, hiding under the cars. Like, you hear all these stories. When we went to Montreal and we walked over to that hotel, which happened to be 2 blocks down from where we were staying, that was not on purpose. There was 7 people waiting for them. It was the 2 of us. There was like 1 dude from California, 3 people from Canada, and then I think the 1 dude was from like Germany. So it was like real Pearl Jam fans from all over the world figuring out where they stayed. And I don't know how anybody else figured it out. I just know how we did. And so the day of the show, like, the guys went out separately and stuff. And that's when we had like a nice 45-minute conversation with McCready. And we took photos with Stone and Jeff, and everybody was super friendly. Like, away from America, I feel like every American band is so much happier just in general. So we went to the show. Show was great. And we go back to the hotel after. And one by one, they come back, like Boom and Matt come back, and Stone and Jeff come, whatever it is. Everybody's super friendly. How'd you like the show? Blah, blah, blah. That band actually is always asking stuff like that. Like, they always want to know that the people that pay money to go see them are happy that they did so. And I can count on, I can tell you about a ton of bands that don't ask that. But those guys really craft. They make sure that everybody's happy, with the set list, whatever it is. So then Eddie comes back, and I don't remember what time it was. It was probably like close to like midnight or something. Comes out of the truck with his security guy, Pete, who's like the head of security for the band. Really nice guy, actually. I've had so many good experiences with Pete. He just kind of looks at Pete, hands him his bag. He's like, "Don't worry, have a good night. You go up." And he just walks over. And we all start just kind of hanging out and talking just outside the hotel. Asked us all our names to begin with. Asked us where we were from. Once again, just he is somebody that is a genuine human being. At one point, he pulls out his pack of American Spirits and he's like, "Do you guys mind?" Everybody's like, "No, do you want it? Do you want one?" And everybody said no. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'll have a cigarette. Yeah. And I would smoke cloves. I smoke weed. I fucking smoke anything at that point in my life. I was 36. No, I wasn't 36. I was 26. Nice counting, Dave. Anyway, everybody listening to this podcast kind of understands the type of person I am. I'm a conversationalist, right? But I'm the type of person that wants to kind of gather people. And like, if nobody's going to talk or nobody's going to move, nobody's going to put on the music at the party, or, nobody's going to be the first one to climb over that fence, it's going to be me, because I don't have patience for people lollygagging. And so I just start talking to Eddie. And we talked about the Ramones, we talked about the Who, and because his association with the Who and being really good friends with Pete and Roger. So the thing that sticks out in my mind about the conversation the most is a movie that was recent at that time that had come out that I had just seen with Scott. It was called Last Days, and it was a Gus Van Sant movie who directed some great movies. He's a very respected director, I should say. Anyway, Gus Van Sant directed a movie called Last Days with Michael Pitt that was loosely based off the last days of Kurt Cobain's life. And I saw it with Scott in New York City in Soho, and I hated it. I hated it. I haven't seen it since, and I bet you I'd probably like it a lot more now. But I just didn't like it. I really didn't. So I'd asked Eddie, I said, did you see this movie? And he's like, "Oh no." He's like, "That's the Van Sant movie about Kurt." And he knew Kurt, obviously. He didn't know him super well, but they had known each other. He's like, "No, I haven't seen it yet." I was like, I didn't like it at all. And my taste was definitely not refined. I was a 26-year-old alcoholic. So, and anyway, that was just the thing that stuck out, really sticks out. And then, we all hung out, and at that time, Eddie wasn't really into doing photos too much, but me and Scott asked him, and he's like, "Yeah, let's all take a photo together." So we got a group shot. I'll put that on the screen. You could see young Dave on there. And like, he was saying goodnight to everybody. He looked at me. He's like, "Hey man, I respect you. Thanks a lot." And I was like, "What?" And he gave me a hug. I was like, "Okay. Yeah. 26-year-old Dave has looked up to Eddie Vedder since he was 14, 13, whatever, and got that chance. Like that. I'll never, ever, ever, ever live that moment down. Like, that was a huge thing for me, just because like I wasn't looking for that validation. I just was having a conversation with somebody who's musically and everything like about music was somebody I respected, and like really every time that Pearl Jam would do a cover, like I love the Who because I explored them through all of the covers that Pearl Jam did, and then getting into the Who. There's so much music that I like that is because of Pearl Jam exposing me to it one way or another. Before he went up, though, this was really funny, and I know that I knew what I was doing. Let's just say that. He's like, "Oh, who's going tomorrow?" And I think all 7 of us said yes, or maybe 6 out of the 7 of us. And he's like, "Oh, is there anything you want to hear?" And he looked at me first. And I was like, Dirty Frank, which, if you don't know Pearl Jam, Dirty Frank is a song that was a B-side to Even Flow. It's a very early song that they wrote about Jeffrey Dahmer, loosely based on that Flea plays bass on. And he's just like, "No fucking way." And I just started laughing. He knew that I asked that because I knew he was going to say no. But on the outside chance he said yes, it would have been amazing. And I was like, I had to shoot my shot. And Scott asked for Immortality, which is a song off their third album, Vitology, which is arguably one of their best songs. And I feel like the one dude from Montreal he might have asked for Release. Either way, he's like, "All right, well, we'll see what I can do." So we go to the show the next I think it was the next night. And I think Scott got mad at me for this. And Scott, you can't really be mad at me for this. But we were like hanging out, waiting to get into the Corral Center in Ottawa to get our posters and then go to the seats. And we had okay seats. And I started talking to this woman online, and she's like, yeah, she got her ticket. She's like, I have an extra ticket. It's second row. Do you want it? And I'm just like, yeah, I do. And so me and Scott didn't sit together at the show because I ended up paying face value for a second row ticket, which at that time was maybe $100. And now, we all know how much it would be. So they open up the show. So the song that the other guy asked for was In Hiding. So like 6 or 7 songs into the set list, Pearl Jam plays Immortality. And I think I could see Scott. He was like losing his shit. And after he finished that song, Eddie said, oh, we're just taking care of a couple of requests. And then they played In Hiding. So they played the 2 songs. They didn't play Dirty Frank, but they played the songs that were requested. So, it was great. And so during a live, Eddie usually brings out tambourines or Rockin' in the Free World, and he throws them to people in the crowd after he uses them a bit. He pointed at the one dude that requested In Hiding because he was side stage and threw them the tambourine. And during the live solo, McCready comes off stage. He started to do that on that Canada tour. He's seeing me all night, pointing at me, seeing me all night, comes right off the stage up to me because I was like right next to the row that you would walk down. Gives me a fist bump and then just keeps playing and keeps walking. And I'm like, that entire show had nods to us, to the ones that were at the hotel. And it was just like, think about the size of that band and the size of that arena. It's where the Ottawa Senators play. It's, 18,000 people, and they single you out to make you to pay the respect to you. Like, hey, we don't forget about any of you. And it was just amazing. So that's the band that they continue to be. So that's 2005. They announced in 2006 that they were releasing a new album, their first album, I think, in 3 years since Riot Act. It was a self-titled Avocado album because it covers an avocado. And they announced that they were doing a New York record release show. And the only way to go to it is you had to go to Tower Records at midnight on the night of the album release and just buy the album and you get a ticket. Needless to say, I'd never done anything like this before. And I went down to Tower Records 24 hours before and got online. And by the time morning rolled around and the next night, there was 400 people online. But I had made some friends that were my friends for years and years and years, meeting them on that line. Clive Davis, who was the owner of Jive and Sony. He wasn't the Sony owner, but Sony Records might have been the CEO, but he owned Jive Records. That was his label under Sony, legendary producer. He came by before midnight, before the album came out, and gave everybody donuts. Funny thing was, Tool's 10,000 Days came out that day as well. So I bought both albums at midnight, got a ticket for Scott because I paid a homeless dude like $200 or $300 to just hop back online when we were getting in. He gave money for the album and all that. So that show was like a week later, whatever. I don't remember. I was fucking whacked out of my head for spending 24 hours on the streets in Union Square. They were in the city for like a week and a half, New York City. They were staying down uptown at the Mandarin. We went to the hotel, I want to say a couple nights before because they were on Letterman to try and get some albums signed. And New York City's got a lot of autograph seekers. A lot. So there was a significant amount of people there. And Eddie comes out of the car, out of the hotel, and starts signing for people in the crowd. Looks up at me, looks up at Scott because we're standing next to each other, points, you, and then you. And I'm like, I saw Last Days. I kind of liked it. I was like, wait, what? I was like, that conversation was almost a year ago. And he looked at both of us and remembered the fucking conversation, which is like, you think about how many people he must meet and see on tour and just in life and between the couple of places he lives, Seattle and Hawaii and stuff. And it's just like, holy shit. So it was like such a great moment. And he's like, oh, are you guys going to the show? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, it's going to be great. So we go to the Irving Plaza show. It was fantastic, sweaty ass night. And me and Scott leave the show and just hop in a cab and go down to the Mandarin to see if we can, like say hello to Eddie and whatever. Maybe get something signed. Might have had the albums too. There's like 7 or 8 professional autograph seekers there, and the truck pulls up and Eddie comes out and it's not signing. He had a long night. And Pete Beadle sees both of us. Pete's the security. Points at both of us, says, come here. Brings us into the hotel with Eddie. And Eddie just like starts talking to us and signing and, says, thanks for all your support. And I'm like, come on, man. What wow. I'm just so fortunate, right? But I put myself in these places, I should say. So that was 2006. That was, I want to say it was March or April when the self-titled album comes out. They announced a full tour for the summer. I want to say the tour started in July. Maybe it goes into September, or is it June to July? And me and Scott decide to do both Los Angeles Forum shows and Santa Barbara Bowl, which I had been to, I think once before. And I told Scott, I'm like, it's the most beautiful venue in California. The band and a lot of other people consider it to be like a mini gorge or a mini Red Rocks. It's set right on the Pacific Ocean. Like you could see the Pacific from your seats, and it's in a neighborhood. So it's a very quiet place where shows have to end, I think at like 10 p.m. is a noise curfew. And so we went, and it was cool. We ran into Tim Comerford from Rage Against the Machine, and Laird Hamilton was there, the Surfer. Sonic Youth opened. Eddie came out and did a solo song beforehand, and they opened the show doing an acoustic set, Pearl Jam, because the sun was still setting, and they said, why don't we enjoy the sunset and play like 8 acoustic songs, and then we'll play a regular set. They opened up with Oceans. It was just perfect. And me and Scott figured out where they were staying because Santa Barbara had like one really nice hotel in that area, and it was the Four Seasons, and it was a resort. So me and Scott kind of said, all right, when they play Yellow Ledbetter, we'll start to leave so we can get out and head to the hotel and just go to the bar. And so we did, because I've heard Yellow Ledbetter 35 times, and you could hear the whole song playing on the way out. And so we get to the bar and the Four Seasons, have a couple drinks, and go outside. And one of their buses pulls up, and the band comes off, and they all say hello. And Eddie comes off and just gives me and Scott a hug and says, thanks for being there, guys. Unceremonious, like just the craziest shit. Like it just felt like I wasn't self-confident thinking like these guys are just being nice to be nice. Like they really appreciate it. And they obviously know that we're going to all these shows and we're spending money. And I don't remember much about that night. I do remember having a drink with their manager. They had 2 managers, and one of them ended up retiring because I wanted to work for them. I was like, I'll be an assistant, but the rest of that night's a little bit of a blur. I won't go into it, but we got home safe. Let's just say that. But that was like it. I've seen them so many times since. I've seen Mike a couple of times. I've only seen Eddie once, but I haven't seen him in the capacity to have a conversation with him in a long time. But it just kind of like, I have a lot of stories like this, and I want to tell them. It just, as I was saying to Trip when we were in the car, it's hard for me to just open up and talk about this because it feels like, it kind of feels like I'm not bragging, but like I need a catalyst for me to want to like tell this. And I think the lane of this podcast makes more sense because it is one of the reasons why I started this podcast, is because like I like talking to people, and I like talking to people that inspire me. And there's not too many more people in the world of entertainment, music, arts, whatever, that has inspired me more than Eddie has. His morals, the way he talks, the kind of way he carries himself, and the things that he is an activist for and a philanthropist for, and the music that he makes and the stories that he tells. And so it's really important to me to remember that sharing these stories is really what this podcast is about when I'm doing these solo things. And I wanted to, talk about something super positive this week, because there's a lot to not be positive about. I will continue to support this band. I mean, I saw them this past year twice here in Seattle, and whenever I can go see them multiple times in one shot, I'll go and I'll give them my money and I'll buy their albums because That was my favorite album last year, was their newest album, Dark Matter. So, yeah, I just wanted to tell that story, and I thought maybe you guys, I thought that everybody listening would appreciate that, even if they don't have an appreciation for the band or don't know much about Eddie Vedder. Yeah. Thanks for listening to this episode. Before we get going, I got to ask you once again, please rate or review this podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. You can do a star rating on Spotify if you haven't. You can do a comment rating, like a Yelp type rating on Apple. I could actually use some more Apple subscribers and comment or reviewers. If you're listening to this or watching this on YouTube, you could drop a comment down below. You can hit a thumbs up, and you can always share this podcast to help it grow. I'm going after bigger guests, and what I mean by bigger, they're not bigger to me. They are bigger in the fact that they are way out of my reach, but I'm reaching them. Things have happened. And yeah, so this has been another episode of Direct Edition, a podcast about nothing and everything. And Joe, I'm sorry about the goddamn size of this file. Peace.